Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Amanda Litman. Amanda is co-founder and president of Run for Something, which recruits and supports young, diverse leaders running for local office. Since 2017, they've launched the careers of thousands of millennial and Gen Z candidates. She is coming to us today live from Brooklyn. Amanda, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Reed.
So let me ask you this first and foremost. How did you decide after so many years in presidential campaigns and all that, that you wanted to go from the biggest, most advanced, complicated campaigns back down to the ground where all of this stuff, I think, gets overlooked too often, but really does matter, not only as far as how close to these things where people actually live their lives and where an individual campaign can be run not for millions of dollars, but for sweat equity and a couple of bucks and community involvement. What made you decide to climb back down the ladder to places where, let's just say, actual human beings live?
So I worked for Hillary for 2 years. And about a week after Election Day, I started hearing from friends from high school and college. Hey, Amanda, you're the only person I know that works in politics because I've worked on a few campaigns before that. If I want to run for office, because if Trump can do this, seems like anybody can, what do I do? And at the time, if you were young and newly excited about politics and wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would take your call. And that, to me, felt like a symptom of some really big problems, both in our democracy and in the Democratic Party specifically. So I reached out to a whole bunch of folks with an idea. What if we started an organization to solve this problem? One of them became my co-founder, an operative named Ross Morales-Raqueto. We wrote a plan, we built a website, and we launched Run for Something on Trump's inauguration day, thinking it would be really small. We'd get 100 people who want to run the first year. In the first week, we had 1,000 people. As of today, we're up to about 192,000 people who've raised their hands to say they want to run. We've endorsed more than 3,000. We've helped elect just about 1,500, all folks 40 and under, mostly women and people of color, to all kinds of local offices: city council, state legislature, school board, library board, American River Flood Control District trustees, the kinds of positions that really make a difference in people's lives. And it's been so cool to see, one, that these are leaders who you can actually get excited about and get really inspired by. And then two, they're starting to move up. We already have 5 people in Congress who started with Run for Something in their state or local election years ago. I know we will have many more running for statewide office or Congress this year and next. We have built this bench of incredible talent, and we're only just getting started.
So let me ask you this, because what you're talking about is the basics of party politics. The idea that you want to create the opportunities for people who were willing to get involved in the political process, which is not an easy thing in and of itself, but also, this, to your point about how you have people who started in flood control districts, and we can get into how many different elected offices there are that get to the federal level. But what it feels like, and again, I say this as an observer of the Democratic Party, Amanda, is why do the Democrats focus so much starting at the federal level? And we have seen since President Obama's presidency that thousands and thousands of local offices have either gone from Democrats to Republicans, or have, as we saw in 2024, 71% of Republicans went unopposed in their campaign. So why is it so hard to get folks to understand that if you want to have long-term success, it doesn't start at the presidency, it starts at the city council?
I think there's a bunch of reasons for this, but the biggest one is where the money is. I think this is a problem with the Democratic donor base generally. And I'll say in particular, some of the bigger Democratic donors over the years, not as much grassroots with everyone. If you're a Republican billionaire, you give to Republican causes because it is good for business, ostensibly, lowers your taxes, and gets you the judges you want. We like to joke, the judges and tax cuts are all they care about. Everything else is bonus. But I think for Republican billionaires, that's mostly true at this point, or has been true for years past. Democratic donors, especially the more wealthy ones, you give because it feels good. You give for altruism. You give because you want to fight for other people. You give for social causes, for either, your gay or queer family members or yourself. You give for women's rights, but you give because maybe you'll get invited to a fun party. Maybe you'll become an ambassador. You give because you'll get the photo that you can put on the wall and show your friends.
Right.
And I say that dismissively, but I do think it's worth understanding the psychology behind this. It is not always the most strategic intentionality. That's starting to change. I want to be very clear. I think in the last 10 years, we have started to change, and many Democratic donors have come around here. But this was part of the problem of really the Democratic Party under Obama and before. It was focus on the electoral battlegrounds, focus on the fancy, exciting candidate at the top of the ticket. Everything else, who cares?
Well, and let me go to a couple of things. One, because some of the things that you noted are very personal. They tend to be social issues, though. Whereas at the state and local level, they are very, I don't want to underplay it by saying nuts and bolts, but if you are a city councilor, if you're a county commissioner, if you're a school board member, if you're on the planning commission, right? These are, they have real impacts, as we talked about, right? People want the garbage picked up. They want their potholes filled in. They want the lights to turn on. They want clean water, right? There's not, you can have a social impact by doing well at your local level, but that's not where it starts, which is I want to do well by my community so people have better education, they have a better opportunity, whatever it is. But again, it tends to be more real, if that makes sense.
It's practical.
Right.
It's, we used to say, like, the further down the ballot, the closer to your home. It's literally, in some cases, your home. The cost of housing, like whether or not you can afford to live where you want to live, is shaped by local government.
Right. And so now I'm hoping, to your point, that, with 1,500 people already elected, and now we're going to have, we've got races in New Jersey and Virginia, as you and I were texting about last week. And we're going to obviously have a whole slew of races again in 2024. So tell me, as I mentioned that stat about 71% of Republicans running unopposed, what is at root the cause there? Is it that if it's a given district, it's so gerrymandered that it's just not worth it? Are there not enough local party resources? Again, is it just back to money, or is it some combination thereof?
Oh, I think it's a little bit all of the above. I think some of it is money. Some of it is that the state and local parties have been under-resourced for years, and many of them, when they have to prioritize which races to focus on federal or top of the ticket. I think some of it is that in a lot of places, Run for Something is the only organization doing candidate recruitment. You think about it right now, you go to the DNC's website, I don't think there's somewhere you can say, I'm interested in running for office as a Democrat. It's a problem. Some state parties have that, but a lot of them don't. And in a lot of places, they're still building up the recruitment infrastructure. I think gerrymandering is certainly an issue, especially on the state legislative level. But I also think, Democrats have gotten away from this idea. We're getting back to it, but in the years past, we've gotten away from this idea that everywhere is worth competing in, even if we lose.
Right.
I think like the only way you're going to get an 80-20 district to become 50-50 is by going from 80-20 to 75-25 to 70-30, cycle over cycle, is to lose by a little bit less. That takes time and investment, and you got to do it. There's no alternative. Well,
I would say this too, not to be too unkind to your party mates, but the probably the Democrats' best asset going for it right now is ballot access in a lot of places, which even in a tough district probably gets you to 40 or 45% to start. Right.
Probably, yeah.
So, and to your point, like, is it going to be a 60-point spread? Probably not. Is it going to be a 40-point spread? Maybe. But the truth is that it's probably going to be somewhere inside of 10, even in a rough district, because of a couple of things. One is because, again, if you give someone to vote for Amanda, they might actually do it. Secondly, I've been telling my friends that, because I think at the union too, we'd like to, get involved in this candidate recruitment process as well. As for me, it's like, what are you going to run on? I'm going to run on competence. I'm going to run on normalcy. I'm going to run on like doing what I can for you. Because you know what? That guy sure as hell isn't doing any of those things. Right. And so sometimes too, we don't have to overcomplicate this stuff. You just have to stand up. And we've seen this in a lot of these local special elections over the years. Whereas I think there was an auditor's race in some place in Iowa that Trump won by God knows how much. But the Democrat wins because they're simply normal. In Colorado Springs, was that a year or two ago, a black Democrat wins the mayoral race in Colorado Springs, pound for pound, maybe the most conservative city in the country, simply because he stood up and was normal. Right. And I think that, sometimes we shouldn't underestimate the damage that Trump is doing and will do. But also to your point about this, which is the further you get away from Washington, D.C., I think also less purchase and less magnetism like MAGA or Trump has, because you see these people, you get a microscope, right? These people are your neighbors. You see them at the grocery store. You've heard of them before. And you're like, wait a second. Like, okay, maybe I'm a conservative, but like, is this the person I really want representing me?
And I think even more than that, it's easy to hate the Democrat you see on Fox News. It's hard to hate Jane, the Democrat who comes to your home, knocks on your door, has a glass of lemonade with you, and talks to you about your property taxes.
Right.
Like, you know her. She's not crazy. She may not agree on every issue, but like she wants to come to your house and have a conversation with you about the things that really matter to you. We talk about meeting people where they're at. Local candidates have both the credibility and the platform to do that in a way that, a member of Congress or a governor or for sure not a president can do. It is so critical to restoring the party's brand, to building power, to building a bench, and also to just making a difference in people's lives to compete in as many of these local elections as we possibly can. And you mentioned Virginia and New Jersey this year. There's close to 100,000 local elections in 2025 alone. Basically, every week is election week this year. We should treat each of them with the same kind of urgency and importance as we do the midterms in 2026 and the presidentials in the years to come.
Right. And I think that winning now is important simply
Mhm.
because the bad guys are not going to make it easier for us.
No.
And I say us collectively, we, as you noted, the Democratic Party has some drag, no question about it. But the bad guys also put significant headwinds in.
Yeah.
Right. They communicate 24/7, 365. They're willing to say anything and do anything. And so you have to be out there early. And that's one thing I do want to ask you about as far as the communications, which you noted, going to someone's door, asking to come in, sitting down. I mean, Amanda, that's work. It's time consuming, and you can't do it like 2 weeks before an election. You have to do it 2 years before an election or 18 months before an election because, and from my perspective, I'd love to hear yours, until and unless you're someone that person who's otherwise disengaged in politics comes to see you as someone, A, that is actually their neighbor, but B, they trust, and C, has some, again, level of connection with, it's very difficult to show up a few weeks before an election and say, you must do this or the world will come to an end. And like, it's just too much for me right now.
I think we take to talk a big game about year-round organizing. Local elections are an incredible way to facilitate that and give it some structure.
Right.
As I just said, there are local elections all over the place this year. Local candidates can be the thing that volunteers show up for. They can be the thing that we are driving towards. They give you a deadline, they give you some urgency, and they matter. And I think that more so than anything is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this year, because every election we have is a chance to practice winning, which the Democratic Party needs a little bit of practice at right now. We need the momentum, we need the forward motion, we need the reminder that oh yeah, we do know how to do this. We did this in 2018 and 2020 and 2022. Yes, 2024 was bad in catastrophic ways, but actually we do have amazing candidates who can really communicate, and if we empower them and give them the resources to do it, we can win in hard places. I like to remind folks, Kansas has a Democratic governor today, right now. That's a red state with a Democratic statewide elected official. Similarly, in the years past, we've had a Democratic senator from Alabama. Just a couple weeks ago, 2 Democrats ousted conservative incumbent mayors in Oklahoma. We can win in hard places if we're willing to compete and we're ready to be prepared with really good talent.
Right. I saw this piece. It was in one of the online, Substack things that I get 8 million of a day, and that's my fault. And I hope people subscribe to my Substack as well. But there was this idea about these 2 political scientists that Democrats should just retreat completely from red states, focus on where they already have a base. And this would be the idea that their long-term objective was that some third party could appear. And look, as someone who, Amanda, has tried to start a third party, and we got ballot access in exactly one state, New York, and it disappeared after 4 years. That is a very, very tough thing. Not that I don't believe that in all things we should have more choice, but the idea of retreating completely. First of all, to your point about getting out of the habit of winning, it's not just Doug Jones in Alabama or Missouri, Kansas, the Dakotas, Nebraska, right? These were all places where there were Democratic statewide leaders, very close elected, parity in legislatures. And the idea of just retreating forthwith, where are we going to go? To the ocean? And so to me, that just seems like a ridiculous suggestion, especially when, again, voters are conditioned, and I think this is more unfortunate, but it is the reality, is voters are conditioned to these 2 particular choices. They are willing to listen to another voice because, as we know, neither party is really that popular, 1. 2, American voters are incredibly fickle. And 3, it's not like we've seen good news in the last 8 or 10 weeks, and it's not like we're going to see better news in the 8 or 10 months before Election Day, November 2025, or certainly Election Day, November 2026.
Yeah. The idea of retreating from red states and starting a third party is so disconnected from reality. It's actually laughable. that is someone who's never had to think about ballot access, who's never had to stand up a campaign. But also, what happens in red states does not stay in a red state. Like we, for any number of reasons, look at the Roe v. Wade decision and the Dobbs decision that started as a state legislative issue in Mississippi and now affects everyone. Narratively, one school in Idaho or Oklahoma or Wyoming does something a little bit too far left or too far right, and the narrative machine spins it up. And all of a sudden, it's everywhere. We cannot pretend that what happens in these states doesn't matter just because we don't live there. And there are people there who are hurting, and we should care about that. I once had a conversation with a funder a couple of years ago. We were asking them for money. And, Run for Something works in all 50 states. And I was explaining, we think it's really important to be working and recruiting candidates everywhere because there are people who need and deserve leadership and deserve a choice everywhere. And they were like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. I really only care about the battlegrounds, like the Electoral College and the House races. It's like, that's a totally legitimate position to take. I do think it's a problem that white nationalists have taken over the state of Idaho.
Right.
That's an issue. That's a test ground for national leadership, as we've now seen. And she said to me straight up, I just don't care if Nazis are running Idaho. I was like, I don't know how to convince you that that's a problem. If that's where you're at, I don't know how to convince you that that's a problem, because it is. It's a huge fucking problem.
Well, and I live in Utah, so I'm just south of Idaho, and I love the state of Idaho. I think it's a beautiful place. It's an incredible place. But I will tell you this, more than that, is that when you let the neo-Nazis or the white nationalists, right, not only take power, but here's what happens too, and I've seen some of this, is otherwise normal people become infected because that is what is being dominated each and every time they turn on the news, every time they turn on the radio. They're reinforced with this. Here in Utah, just to give you a sense of why these things matter even in red states, the legislative session here in Utah, Amanda, just ended last Friday night. They zeroed out, the Republican legislature zeroed out all funding for spousal abuse and child abuse victims. Zero. Cool. Gone. Nothing. Gone. Where I live, Peace House, who had a $1.4 million budget, they thought they were going to take a $100,000 haircut. They are getting nothing now. They deal with more than one case a day, 500 cases in 2024, gone. The money is gone. So to think that, it doesn't matter, no, it does matter, because even if you don't live in Utah or Idaho, or you only come skiing here, right, there are actual people who, through no fault of their own, are experiencing horrific trauma that will resonate throughout their lives and their children's lives. And now they literally, Amanda, have no place to go. And I'll tell you, for me, I'm not going to be the guy who says, not my problem, or I really don't care if Nazis run. That, to me, you're right. I'm willing to give an understanding because I could see the perspective, but I'm not willing to forgive the myopia that gets to somebody to that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the flip to that is actually a little bit of counterpower can make a big difference. We worked with a young woman who ran and won for a seat in the West Virginia State House, Kayla Young. I think there's maybe 11 Democrats in the entire state legislature. They are a super minority.
Right.
She was telling me that I think it was the last legislative cycle, Republicans tried to push through this really egregious, cruel anti-trans bill,
right,
in a way that was so damaging and dangerous for trans kids that it could have been really, really harmful. She was very little power. If the Republicans wanted to pass it, they could. She decided to muck up the gears. She did, basically compounded, tagged on so many amendments that the paperwork and time that they would have had to spend to process every single amendment that she wanted to add onto this bill meant that it would have taken up the rest of the legislative session. So they dropped it. They dropped it. And did she have the votes to beat it? No, but there's a lot of different ways that you can gum up the works if you're willing to fight. And her presence in that chamber, Kayla Young's presence in the West Virginia State House, makes a difference.
So let me zoom out back. And again, I don't want to make this, it spends 45 minutes asking Amanda why Democrats aren't as good as they should be. But why isn't there more creativity like that? Because, if you think back to, and I'll lay it on Democratic, lions like LBJ or Harry Reid, they were masters of their craft. They absolutely understood what could and couldn't be done, how you could stop things. And they were unapologetic about it. They knew the nature of power and were unapologetic about it. So how do we get some of that sort of stiffening of the spine back?
I think we're starting to see more of that. Part of this is a little bit of a generational divide. I think there is a class of Democrats who came to power in a moment in which there was privileging of decorum, this idea that civility was good and that bipartisanship was possible, and then like never quite got the message that that was no longer the case. That while there are certainly some on the state and local level in many places, local Republicans who do want to govern, especially on the national level, that is no longer true. And these are basically not good faith partners in governance. They are not eager to compromise with us.
Or
There's
even
a generation. I will say there's a generation of Democrats who are coming up, like especially folks who came of age in the 2016 and beyond era, the last decade, who understand that's the case and who know how to communicate that that's the case. And I think that's like just as important. There's certainly some, I think about Harry Reid, he was an incredible fighter. He would not have been well suited to this moment for communication styles. Like he would not have thrived in the TikTok era. That's okay. He shouldn't need to, and he wouldn't have needed to. I think now, as we look to the leaders of our party today, who both have the skills to fight and the stomach to fight, it's the younger folks. It's the next generation of leaders. And that's the folks that I'm so excited about. It's the ones that we've been working with. It's the ones I'm hearing from in my personal, who are just like ready to get in this and do it differently. We got to make the space for them. That's a separate challenge, but I think they're coming.
Well, that's you and I texted you about this before our interview and I've been asking some other folks in the sort of Democratic superstructure. I've run into a lot of people, in the 5 or so years I fought alongside Democrats. And look, I'm almost 50, Amanda, and in too many rooms and in too many conversations, I'm still the youngest one there. Like how do we clone you? Where are the rest of you, right? You mentioned Gen Z, you mentioned under 40. Like, where are they? Because like they understand the nature of this stuff. I mean, Tara Palmieri, who just left Puck, she went out on her own. She got this scoop yesterday that, I don't know if it was the DNC or somebody hired some influencer, right, to TikTok person who's like, you have to be more authentic. Like, well, no shit, right? But if you have to hire somebody to tell you you need to be more authentic, you're sort of already lost the plot. So that's the other part too, is that, having spent, I went to see the Duke Democrats last fall, and I've met you and some other really inspiring young people. Authenticity is not a problem for y'all, right? So what is it that you need, your generation needs, other younger, Democrats, or for me, the pro-democracy movement? How do we give y'all that space? How do we make that space? How can we be helpful to that effort?
It's so funny that you say that. I have this book coming out in May about next generation leadership. It's called When We're in Charge. And the whole introduction, I talk about how since I started Run for Something when I was 26, about to turn 27 years old, till today, I'm now 35. I am still the youngest person in basically every room I'm in.
Right.
And like it started to change a little bit, but it is wild. And I still cannot believe that to be the case in some of these spaces. I think part of this is especially the Democratic Party privileges seniority. This is true on the congressional level in particular. But I also think we got to force our way in, which sucks. We shouldn't have to. But I will never forget when I started Run for Something in the months, 6 or 8 weeks leading up to it, I saw a Facebook note post from a former boss of mine who had been working in politics since 2000. And he said something along the lines of like, you are going to be waiting for the adult to come and tap you on the shoulder and tell you it's your turn. You're going to be waiting for someone to like step up and be in charge. There are no grownups anymore. You are the adult that you need to step up. Like, consider this your tap on the shoulder. And I really internalized that. And I think that every young person, whether you're in your 20s, your 30s, or even your 40s at this point, which is really spring chicken for politics,
Right.
Like we can't wait. We can't wait because no one is going to make the space for us. We got to force our way in, and it's hard and it sucks. And we have to do it anyway because there's no alternative.
Well, no, there is no alternative. And just, my generation and, my parents and my, maybe not so much my grandparents, but right. So many of the generations ahead of or behind you, however you're looking at it, right? Like we helped create the mess that y'all are living with now. And the people that younger than you and your kids and my kids will have to deal with in coming years. And so that's the other part too, is like, we should be helping. Like, here's the one thing we know, like, yes, I want to be here for a lot longer, but at some point, like, I need to turn over the reins to people who want to continue. There's a quote from the Talmud I love. It's upon us to begin the work. It's not upon us to finish it. And that's why, like, what I think that you are doing and so many of your compatriots are doing is crucial, is that, let me turn it to the Republican side, right? Chuck Grassley is the Republican senator from Iowa. He was born in 1933. What does that mean? It means he was born in the first year of FDR's first term. which, Amanda, makes him older than the New Deal. Right? Don't we think that maybe someone who is around before Social Security existed, maybe it's time for them to say it's up to somebody else? If you really think that the internet is just a bunch of tubes and pipes, right? If you have no conception of the modern world, right, then maybe you shouldn't be deciding how we as Americans are going to live in said modern world. And I think that that's what we're seeing, is that there is this unwillingness to let go. That, I mean, when I am, God willing, I'll make it to Chuck Grassley's age. I want to be spending time with my grandkids and my great grandkids and sitting on a pond and painting or some goddamn thing. But I don't want to be hanging around the United States Senate, blustering into a microphone. It's incredible to me.
I'm shocked that Iowa Republicans aren't angrier and trying to challenge him, because I expect we will see this a bunch in 2026. There's going to be a ton of primary challengers to older Democrats. I am shocked that doesn't happen on the Republican side, because really, there's not a single person in Iowa that could do a better job of representing that community than Chuck Grassley. Not a single one. Not a single one who has a higher value above replacement than him. It is like the height of hubris to assume that you're the only person that could do it.
Right. Well, as my father, God rest his soul, used to say, he worked on Capitol Hill for many years. If senators could wear togas, they would. But let me ask you this, because you mentioned something that has come up in the past in the under the auspices of, say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was willing to support primary challengers to incumbents and was roundly, and probably still to this day, roundly criticized and looked down upon for that. But it seems, to your point about forcing your way in, that if there's going to be a change where you don't have, at least in the U.S. House, most of the ranking members are north of 70. If you don't do that, then nothing's going to change, at least for the next 2 years, or until these people are just literally wheeled out. And so how do you start to explain because here's the other part too. There's a hell of a lot more of y'all than there are anybody else at this point in the country. So how do you start to explain with a very straight face, we love you guys. We love everything you've done for the most part. Directionally, we think you've been in the right place. But now you've got to step aside. And if you're not going to step aside, then we will do what we feel like we need to do in our best interests, not in the interest of your seniority.
I think about it like this. Everybody is entitled to age with dignity and respect and grace. Everyone is entitled to that. No one is entitled to retire or die as one of the 500 most powerful people in the country. No one. It is your responsibility as a leader to bring up people behind you. Generational leadership is a fundamental core, it's a good deed. You quoted the Talmud earlier, Lador Vador, the generation from generation is a fundamental part of what it means to be a good leader, to have successors, to think about succession planning. If you have not built a bench behind you of incredible people in your community, in your district, then you have actually failed in your responsibility. Your legacy, and we see this now with Dianne Feinstein, with even RBG, people are reassessing what that meant, with Joe Biden. If you have not built a bench and created space for the next folks to come up, you are doing all of your hard work a disservice. Not making it come to a point where we have to take the keys from grandma,
All right. So tell us, you mentioned your book. Tell us about it. What does it tell people? When's it coming out? And how can we learn more about it?
I'm so excited about my book. It's called When We're in Charge, The Next Generation's Guide to Leadership. It is now available for pre-order, but it comes out May 13th. And it's a guide for millennials and Gen Z who want to break the bad cycle of boomer leadership, who know that we have to be authentic, but understand that when you're in charge of other people, you want to be responsibly authentic. What does that look like? How do you show up as yourself? How do you create spaces for your team to be themselves, but not have to give away everything to who they are? How do you think about work-life balance? How do you think about your relationship to others, to the internet, to your job, to your ambition? Knowing that all of this is in deep tension, and that part of the reason for millennials and Gen Z, it is so hard to lead right now, is because the models we have to do it no longer make sense for the way the world functions now. So you can get it wherever you get your books. Pre-orders are really important. And I'm really excited to keep talking about it, because I think it has never been more important for us to decide we're not going to do it the way we did it before.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I came up earlier than you, on the other side of the aisle, where as an intern, the beatings will continue until happiness is achieved, right? And that was part of the deal. You don't want to do it? We've got someone else in line who's willing to take your spot. I worked in 2000, right? I think I was on the road for something like 7 months for $40 a day per diem. It's what you did. because if you didn't do it, right, I was an advanced guy. If I didn't do it, someone was there willing to take the team cell phone and the airplane ticket and the hotel room in my spot. I wasn't going to give it up. But to your point, I think the world has changed. I think also, and let me ask you this. There is, I think, a distinct tension. Again, Republicans are typically better at getting in line, but again, the punishments tend to be far more severe as well. But how as a modern Gen Z or, millennial Democrat, how do you handle the tension of there is a candidate who is the voice for a district, and as a staffer, you may have a different opinion on that? I once told someone who I was working with, like, look, the candidate, it's their campaign, right? And this is just my sort of old crustiness. You don't have to work here. But if you're going to work here, just understand that, like, part of it, and I think this is really part of the tension, especially nowadays, Amanda, is like, you have to subsume some part of your belief system to that. That doesn't mean you have to give it up. It just means that, like, if you're going to get outside publicly where the candidate is, I think anyway, the candidate still has every right to go, like, what are you doing here? Yeah. Right? Because now you're making me ask questions. And it's weird because sometimes campaigns are not democracies.
No, they shouldn't be. Not every job, and campaign or otherwise, is a democracy. Not every job is a co-op. Not every job is a collaborative effort. There are missions and goals. And when you work somewhere, you align with those missions and goals. I get asked a lot for advice for people sort of entering political work. My number one tip is to find a political home outside of your political job. That doesn't mean that you can't fully believe in your work's mission. But it shouldn't be the only place that you do politics. It shouldn't be the place where necessarily you are looking for all of your civic engagement. I think about the work that I do. I started Run for Something. I love Run for Something. I deeply believe in our mission. I have political positions that Run for Something never touches on. My interest in, say, New York City politics is totally distinct from my work at Run for Something. Connected to it, but it is not the only place that I do politics. It's not the only way that I show up as a good citizen or a civic actor. I think that's really, really important, especially for young people entering politics now. Do not make your job the only place you do politics, and do not make your job the place that you do politics onto. Your boss is probably not the enemy here. I think that is, like, maybe they are, but, like, be really thoughtful about how you strategically engage in this. I think that's a lesson that sometimes you have to learn the hard way, which sucks, but it's also something I think leaders can do a lot more to create systems for, both in politics and outside of it. Like, how is Run for Something one of our policies is that if people want to volunteer on a campaign or take a half day of work to go to a protest or what have you, we have the space and the policies to allow them to do that. Because we know political engagement requires time sometimes outside of your job or during the working hours. And that's okay, because people should have political interest outside of it.
Well, amen. And civic interest too, which I think you mentioned, and I think is so crucial. And I think that one thing I saw from my travels in the last year or so is that there are a lot of people who, I don't think because they want to be disconnected, I think they just feel disconnected because it's so loud, it's never ending, and it can feel overwhelming. And as we know, most of the time, if you feel overwhelmed, you just shut down, right? It's easier to stay in your house and look at your phone or watch Netflix or whatever it is, because the rest of the world will go on around you. And to the extent that you have to leave your house, you'll do so. But for the most part, like, just leave me alone. But we can't do that, because I think that, the bad guys want us atomized, right? They want us feeling that way. And I think that, one thing we've seen just in the first few months of this year, and I think you can probably see it too, is that when you get people back together, it is an incredible thing to see people's eyes light up, to see almost a relief. They're like, okay, there are people out there. Like, again, a lot of our meetups are apolitical, non-political, non-partisan. They're just, they want to go eat pizza and just meet somebody new. And of course, as you know, I know it sounds sort of like cliche, but then you find out you do have a lot in common with somebody. Oh yeah, well, I went to high school with them too. I asked you earlier, who knew that we both went to Fairfax County Public Schools, many years apart, but we did, right?
That's right.
But would not have known that. So, I think that's one thing. And then as you start to do that, you also start to say, well, you know what, that Amanda, she's got something, right? Maybe we should talk to her more. Maybe she's got the opportunity to run, to be a leader, to do something. But again, if we're not out there talking to people, then we're just going to dig deeper in the hole we're already in.
That's exactly right. I've been writing about this a little bit on my personal Substack. My husband has made a New Year's resolution to host dinner at our home every weekend. And we have two little kids, a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. So it's very hard for us to, like,
you are in it.
Yeah, super in it. So it's, like, hard for us to, like, go out to restaurants, like, go out to, evening meetups, that kind of thing. So we're bringing people to us Every Saturday this year, we've hosted people at our home. Sometimes it's folks that we know really well. Sometimes it's like the family from the playground that we only see at pickup.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been really beautiful to just like have a couple hours to have conversations and, eat tacos, whatever my husband feels like cooking that weekend. And to your point, it's really nice to be in person with people and have the space to have a real conversation. It's really fun.
Yeah, because so much of the rhythm of our lives, again, they follow similar patterns, whether you've never met each other before or not. We all have those things that are common threads that do bring us together, that I think make us better. And again, to your point, that I don't know, Amanda, fellowship is the right word, but that ability to sit around a table and just laugh about something, or somebody's a raconteur, they tell this story and everybody's doubled over laughing. Right. And you leave feeling better, like, oh my God, thank God we did that. Right. I needed that. I needed that. All right. Well, you have been far too generous with your time. Before I let you go, tell us where we can find out everything we need to know about Run for Something. And can you be older and still run for something, or do you have to be younger and run for something?
So you can find Run for Something at runforsomething.net. We are on basically every social media platform with some conglomeration of either Run for Something or Run for Something Now. So our pipeline program, so if you sign up with us and say you want to run, we have a ton of resources available to you. We have a ton of trainings, intro calls, programming, all that kind of stuff, no matter what age you are. If you decide to run, you get on the ballot and you want to be endorsed by our political program, that is limited to folks 40 and under, because we're really trying to bring more youth representation into power. Lots of stuff for lots of people. You can sign up with us and we would love to help you run. If you don't want to run, you just want help, you can make a donation at runforsomething.net/donate.
And where can we find you online?
I'm Amanda Litman, all over the place, and you can learn more about me at just amandalitman.com.
Perfect. As always, gang, you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, and Says Us, SEZ.US, at Reed Galen on Twitter and TikTok, Twitter and Threads at Reed_Galen USA. As always, gang, on Substack. Amanda Litman, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time. Stop that.